In the mid-1980s, an Air Force colonel quietly taped doctored photos of a flying saucer to a bar bulletin board just miles from Area 51, then watched as locals swore they'd seen aliens. All to mask the first tests of the F-117 Nighthawk stealth jet, a recently declassified 2024 report by the Pentagon's All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, RO, and a Wall Street Journal investigation revealed that beginning. In the 1980s, a retired Air Force colonel and others in the Department of Defense planted fake UFO stories and doctored flying saucer photos to camouflage secret weapons programs. Notably the F-117 Nighthawk stealth aircraft around Groom Lake's Area 51 in Nevada. These findings were first published June 8, 2025. This matters now because it shows how deep government secrecy can erode public trust, has prompted new congressional hearings into military disinformation, and could reshuffle funding and oversight for future defense projects by exposing the true costs of hiding classified programs. Welcome to Today's story takes you deep into one of the most guarded enigmas of modern history. Area 51. From government cover-ups and secret societies to declassified documents and chilling eyewitness accounts, this journey uncovers layers of secrecy that stretch across decades. Real names, real files, real questions. What are they hiding beneath the Nevada desert? Why do the documents self-censor? And why do some who speak disappear? Buckle in. This isn't just another conspiracy, it's a pattern. Before we begin, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay tuned for more investigations into the shadows. Let's begin. The broadcast came without warning. A syndicated special aired on over 100 stations across the United States. UFO cover-up. Live, part entertainment, part anomaly. Its hosts wore bemused smiles, but beneath the surface was something colder, more calculated. Midway through the show, amid canned laughter and pre-recorded interviews, the signal faltered. The screen distorted, audio wavered, and then it appeared two words, faint but deliberate: Majestic 12. The term had never been uttered on live television before, and it wasn't an accident. The story began 4 years earlier, in December of 1984. Jamie Shandera, a TV producer known in small circles for his fascination with Cold War esoteric, received a nondescript envelope at his Los Angeles home. No return address, postmarked from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Inside was a 35mm film roll. Shandera developed it in private. What emerged were 8 pages of grainy black and white documents. They appeared to be briefing memos, dated November 18, 1952, labeled Top Secret Eyes Only, addressed to President-elect Dwight D. Eisenhower. They outlined the existence of a covert committee known as Majestic 12, allegedly formed by executive order to recover and study extraterrestrial technology following the 1947 Roswell incident. The documents detailed the retrieval of wreckage and biological entities, advised strict information compartmentalization, and warned of the psychological fallout if the public were to ever learn the truth. No authentication existed, no provenance. Yet the typography, the phrasing, and the references to real military operations lent them the weight of possibility. Over time, other names attached themselves to the story: Bill Moore, co-author of the Roswell incident and a researcher tied to Air Force intelligence, and Stanton Friedman, a nuclear physicist who would become one of the most prominent voices. In ufology, the three men formed a nexus point for a mythos that would soon spiral out of control. In October 1988, when UFO cover-up Live aired, it was marketed as entertainment. But it was more than that. Behind the dramatized alien interviews and night vision reenactments, layers of signal lay embedded within the noise. Post-broadcast forensic audio engineers discovered a faint secondary modulation beneath the standard frequency, an encrypted pulse, undetectable to standard receivers. The pattern was real, the modulation too precise to be accidental. It was, according to later leaks from NSA contractors, a spectral layer used in PSYOPs transmissions, not meant to be heard, but received subconsciously. 3 men connected to the broadcast died within weeks. One, a communications analyst, was found in his Virginia apartment with his phone dismantled and his laptop drive magnetically wiped. Another, a field contractor with prior clearance to Project Snowbird, vanished en route to a debriefing. The third was never publicly named. Internal DARPA files, obtained years later through a FOIA loophole, listed the deaths as indirect. Cognitive casualties. The MJ-12 documents themselves were never officially verified, but neither were they definitively debunked. The FBI issued a memo in 1988 calling them bogus, but that memo itself was later revealed to be based on a photocopy, not the original source film. And within that same year, internal Air Force memos later declassified discussed public response strategies to uncontrolled MJ narratives, indicating the story had penetrated high-level briefings. This wasn't an isolated anomaly. It was a carefully seeded construct. Throughout the 1980s and into the early 1990s, a number of obscure but interconnected leaks began to surface. Many traced back to a loose network of defense contractors, intelligence consultants, and psychological operations veterans who operated under code names like Falcon, Sparrow, Condor, collectively known by researchers as the Aviary. They were tied to the Pentagon, to the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence, and to disinformation cells embedded in private aerospace firms like EG&G and Lockheed, Skunkworks. The names behind the birds were partially unmasked over the years. Falcon was rumored to be an Air Force Office of Special Investigations officer. Sparrow was reportedly a former NSA linguist. Condor worked on Project Aquarius, a deep black file whose very title remained redacted in every FOIA response. Their role, not to suppress the truth, but to distort it, to weaponize it. Civilian researchers who got too close were steered into delusion, fed false leads, and broken down by contradiction. In 1989, Bill Moore admitted publicly that he had been in contact with Air Force intelligence, tasked with feeding disinformation to prominent ufologists like Paul Benowitz, who suffered a psychological breakdown after years of monitoring mysterious transmissions near Kirtland Air Force Base. What was being hidden wasn't just the existence of extraterrestrial life, it was the use of that mythos. Aliens were the perfect smokescreen, exotic enough to deflect scrutiny, malleable enough to absorb whatever truth needed to be hidden that week. By the early 2000s, the line between reality and fabrication had dissolved. Whistleblowers from across the spectrum, SETI technicians, defense engineers, even low-level logistics officers began feeding the conspiracy. Some, like Dr. Stephen Greer, amassed troves of affidavits and testimony. Others vanished after going public. In 2003, a former UK Ministry of Defence analyst posted a 98-page briefing titled Signal Inversion and Neural Override in Broadcast Media, linking anomalous EEG data to specific television airings from the late 80s, including UFO cover-up, live. The document was removed within 24 hours, but not before it was mirrored. One page stood out. It claimed that the 1988 broadcast had not only transmitted visual content, but also carried embedded neural entrainment sequences designed to trigger dormant memory pathways, calibrated to specific genetic markers. It wasn't meant for everyone, just for them. By then, the concept of Majestic 12 had evolved. It wasn't just 12 men in a bunker. It was a schema model of control, of information curation. Rumors spread of subprojects, Sigma dealing with alien communication. Plato handling diplomatic interfaces. Garnet concerned with psychological stability of contactees. All allegedly under the umbrella of MJ. Antarctica entered the conversation next. In 2016, satellite data released through a hacked NOAA server revealed geometric anomalies beneath the ice near Queen Maud Land. Analysts cross-referenced them with 1947 Luftwaffe expedition maps retrieved from post-war intelligence archives. The match was precise. Declassified GRU cables from the 1980s referenced an American facility beneath the southern ice. A facility associated with seismic patterns inconsistent with tectonic activity. Its name surfaced in exactly one place, a 1983 Lockheed internal. Briefing stamped colorful access. The subject, Station Upsilon. Within the briefing were references to non-human intelligences, preserved craft components, and cognitive boundary thresholds. One quote was underlined in red ink. If containment fails, mythology becomes infrastructure. More recently, digital breadcrumbs have resurfaced. In 2023, a voice believed to be Jamie Chandra's was detected broadcasting from an unregistered data node in São Paulo. The audio described Phase 2 reactivation protocols and pattern stabilization via media echo. Analysis revealed timestamps encoded in the waveform pointing to various airings of the 1988 broadcast, rebroadcast covertly in frames spliced into satellite signals, YouTube ads, and even Netflix background loops. The term used was anchoring. Then came the signal. In May 2025, a research vessel in the South Pacific registered a shortwave anomaly from beneath the Tonga Trench. Non-random, artificial. The sequence repeated 3 times before cutting to silence. The ship's onboard AI attempted to analyze the transmission, but within 11 seconds, the system crashed. Before going dark, it uploaded a single file to the cloud. A low-resolution JPEG. A weathered memo, typed in courier font. It bore a heading, Majestic 12, Reactivation Order. Dated June 2025. Stamped Authorized, Project Prometheus, OAA, Theta. 8 names followed, none known to public record, but in the bottom right corner, faintly visible in reflection, was the outline of a man, standing in a control room, wearing a black suit, and smiling. What began with a television broadcast was never just media. It was an activation, a test of receptivity, a blueprint for information control in the age of omnipresent signal. And it may have only been the beginning. The desert doesn't lie, it only waits. In the silence between gusts of wind across Groom Lake, in the heat mirages that shimmer above the tarmac, the truth remains buried. Not by sand, but by layers of misdirection, denial, and policy. Area 51 is a name etched into American myth. Yet for decades, it was a place that did not officially exist. The US government didn't acknowledge it, didn't name it, didn't chart it. Cartographers were instructed to omit it. Pilots were told to avoid it. And when asked, the Air Force gave one answer, over and over again. It's an open training range. But on June 25, 2013, a single FOIA release forced that lie to bend. The CIA declassified a portion of its internal history, specifically the development of the U-2 and Oxcart spy plane programs. For the first time, official documents used the name Groom Lake. They admitted to secret flights. They acknowledged that the base had operated covertly since April 1955. The veil lifted, just slightly. Still, something about the release felt strategic. It gave the public a sliver of truth, enough to satisfy curiosity, but not enough to explain the decades of omission. And the devil, as always, was in the timeline. According to the documents, Area 51 was used to test reconnaissance aircraft during the Cold War, but they stopped short of the present. Activities after the 1970s remained classified. Facilities that were expanded in the 1990s are never mentioned. Programs visible from satellite photos in the 2000s appear in no official narrative. A base that had grown in size, security, and infrastructure is still labeled today as a mere testing range. The contradiction isn't theoretical, it's operational. The National Security Archive confirmed that the original U-2 program operated under extreme secrecy, but the level of compartmentalization at Groom Lake far exceeds what was required for flight testing. Internal communications were air-gapped. Physical access was limited not by clearance level, but by assigned compartment. Even the janitorial staff underwent background checks, typically reserved for nuclear sites. What was being protected? Bob Lazar's claims in 1989 detonated into that vacuum. He alleged that he worked at a site known as S4, located just south of Area 51, near Papoose Lake. His job, reverse engineer non-terrestrial propulsion systems. According to Lazar, he observed 9 different craft, all housed in connected hangars, built into the mountainside. One of the systems used element 115, then unconfirmed as a power source. It generated gravity waves. It defied Newtonian mechanics. The scientific community rejected him, but slowly, pieces of Lazar's story began to align with independent discoveries. The bone density scanner he described in 1989 at time dismissed as fantasy was later confirmed to be in use as secure. Doe facilities in the late 1980s. The hand scanner's image appeared in a 2013 declassified document. His detailed map of S4's supposed layout showed infrastructure that did not appear on public satellite images until years later, when new access roads appeared near the described coordinates. Lazar claimed that after he went public, his educational and employment history was scrubbed. Records from Caltech and MIT showed no enrollment. His previous employer, Los Alamos National Lab, initially denied his presence until his name was found in an internal phone book, confirming employment at the facility's Meson Physics Division. Whether or not he worked on alien craft, the attempt to erase him was verifiable. Since Lazar's appearance, other insiders have stepped forward, some anonymously, others publicly. A pattern began to form. Multiple individuals describing propulsion systems that used space-time distortion, materials with isotopic ratios not found on Earth, and flight characteristics that defy conventional aerodynamics. These were not delusions. They were data points. Fragmented, yes, but collectively coherent. Then came the black triangles. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, witnesses from California to Belgium began reporting large, silent, triangular craft that hovered without turbulence, made 90-degree turns at impossible speed, and emitted no sonic boom. Some theorized these were advanced terrestrial aircraft, the successors to the SR-71 and B-2. Others believed they were evidence of recovered technologies being operated. One document, leaked from an internal Lockheed Martin research unit, referenced a program known as TR-3B Astra, though never confirmed. The document described a craft with plasma-based anti-gravity drive and an operational ceiling. Beyond the Carmine Line, if these sightings were simply misidentified aircraft, why did so many occur near restricted airspace? Why were radar logs from NORAD showing unexplained targets moving at 6,000 miles per hour over Utah then vanishing? And why, even today, does the FAA redirect civilian air traffic away from Groom Lake with zero justification? In 2004, a congressional audit discovered an anomalous funding trailer, misfiled ledger entry tied to the Department of Energy, not the Department of Defense. The entry was labeled Containment Oversight Project X-12. The amount, $234 million. The line item was buried in a larger renewable energy allocation. Every attempt to trace it led to dead ends. Journalists who submitted FOIA requests received denial letters citing national security exemptions. No contractor was ever listed, no timeline, no location. But in a 2006 internal memorandum from Sandia National Laboratories, related to the auditor, single sentence referenced the X-12 by name. It read, "Reintegration of X-12 components, contingent upon stabilization of containment integrity thresholds at Site V." What was Site V? Why did it require containment? And, more importantly, what was being reintegrated? In traditional weapons development, the term containment refers to nuclear safety. But the context here was different. There was no mention of isotopic shielding, no mention of warheads, no mention of criticality. Instead, phrases like cognitive risk matrix, disassociation metrics, and non-local feedback appeared. This wasn't about radiation. It was about exposure, mental, perceptual, possibly even temporal. In 2008, a DoD contractor filed a whistleblower complaint under the Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act. His testimony was never released, but fragments were quoted in a 2011 oversight hearing. The technology recovered was not inert. It is self-interacting. Observing it changes it. Housing it requires more than shielding it, requires forgetting. The idea that recovered technology could influence human cognition is not new. CIA experiments under MK Ultra tested LSD, sensory deprivation, and hypnotic suggestion in the 1950s and 60s. But this went further. These weren't substances. These were objects, non-linguistic, but capable of affecting thought, memory, even belief. The implication was staggering, that the government had, since at least the 1980s, possessed technology capable of influencing not just the physical world, but consciousness itself. And the test site, Groom Lake, S4, the places that didn't exist. By 2013, while the public fixated on the declassification of U2 records, deeper analysts noticed what wasn't said. The released history made no mention of concurrent programs that operated in the same airspace programs like Project Aurora, long rumored to involve pulse detonation, propulsion systems capable of Mach 10 travel. There was no mention of atmospheric displacement tests, recorded by seismic stations in Nevada between 1988 and 1993, that corresponded with visual reports of thunderless booms and skyquakes. And most critically, the name S4 never appeared. despite multiple testimonies placing it as an annex to the main Groom Lake facility. Satellite photos tell a story official records won't. Between 2007 and 2018, analysts documented the construction of subterranean entrances west of Papoose Lake entrances that appear to disappear and reappear with successive imaging passes, likely using retractable camouflage. Adjacent to these features are ventilation stacks and linear exhaust patterns indicating underground turbine activity. Civil engineering models estimate excavation on the scale of 30,000 cubic meters enough to house an underground hangar the size of a football stadium. But for what purpose? One potential answer lies in a document leaked from a joint Department of Energy and Air Force research project, dated March 2009. It references electromagnetic anomaly containment procedures, non-standard physics, boundary trials, and most troublingly, personnel rotation limits to mitigate perceptual synchronization decay. The file was stamped with a classification code not seen in any other U.S. security framework. Epsilon 6 clearance required. No other clearance levels in public domain match this designation. If authentic, this suggests not just a black program but one that required personnel safeguards against prolonged exposure to whatever was being housed. Witness accounts from former contractors suggest that these limits were enforced. One anonymous engineer, known only by the alias Sandor, described work sessions limited to 4-hour intervals. After each session, psychological debriefs were conducted. MRI scans were compared before and after entry. Memory discrepancies were common. Workers reported déjà vu, time loss, hallucinations, and in one case, the sudden onset of foreign language. Comprehension without prior exposure. The symptoms were never explained. What's striking is that these claims mirror data points from older CIA research into information fields, a theory explored under Projects Stargate and Grillflame. In those studies, subjects placed in altered states reported shared experiences of entities, symbols, and geometric structures. Later, when descriptions were compared, patterns emerged that could not be attributed to chance. Now, take that and apply it to Area 51. What if the base is not simply a testing ground for future aircraft, but a containment zone for technology or entities that operate on levels of consciousness, information, and perception? What if the secrecy isn't just about what we might see, but about what we might become by seeing it? This aligns disturbingly with the Defense Intelligence Agency white paper, inadvertently released through a contractor breach in 2017. The document, titled Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Metrics, lists 38 focus areas, many seemingly abstract, among them traversable wormholes, negative mass propulsion, and cognitive hazard evaluation protocols. Several references were footnoted with field datas for NV as the source. The authors included physicists tied to Bigelow Aerospace and other defense firms with access to restricted airspace in Nevada. Notably, one section of the paper describes a phenomenon labeled informationally activated structures, materials or objects whose properties change based on who observes them or how they are described. In short, a material that reads, "You back." This mirrors the earlier whistleblower's claim. Observing it changes it. In 2020, a former FAA radar technician came forward anonymously through an encrypted channel. His claim, for years, radar anomalies above Groom Lake had been written off as weather interference or instrument glitches, but his terminal was patched into a direct NORAD feed. He saw objects accelerating from 0 to Mach 6 in under 2 seconds. No sonic boom, no heat bloom. Objects that stopped mid-air, then vanished. When he flagged the incidents to his superior, he was told, "Those returns are not our concern. They're Groom's concern." Later that year, an unclassified NORAD airspace update removed previously charted waypoints near Groom Lake and inserted a notation reserved for priority asset maneuvers. No explanation was provided. In the classified world, language is camouflage. What is not said matters more than what is. The redactions surrounding Project X-12, the total omission of S4 in official records, and the language of containment, cognitive decay, and personnel synchronization all point to something far beyond aircraft. And then came the final thread. In late 2023, a defunct hard drive recovered from a closed NOAA weather station in southern Nevada was found to contain a corrupted audio log. Forensics traced its last write date to August 1999. The file was heavily fragmented, but 2 minutes were salvageable. The voice, muffled and distorted, belongs to an unidentified male, possibly military. X-12 is not mechanical. It's not even alive in the way we define it. It's responsive. It anticipates. During the third trial, Subject Bravo attempted to initiate disengagement, but X-12 preempted the command. It already knew. It reflected him. Not behaviorally. Structurally, his neural signature mirrored in real time. Then the containment lights failed. The recording ends with a burst of electromagnetic noise that shorted the recovery system's drive. No backup exists. As of today, the U.S. government maintains its position. Area 51 is a high-security test site for experimental aerospace technology. The public is to believe the past is closed, the skies are empty, and all secrets are accounted for. But that's not what the evidence shows. It shows airframes that cannot be tracked, budgets that disappear, documents that redact not names but entire concepts, whistleblowers who are erased, and phenomena that behave more like ideas than machines. And in the middle of it all, X-12, still redacted, still unexplained, and still waiting, somewhere in the desert, beyond the chain-link fences, past the no trespass signs and the scorched earth, something remains hidden. Not because we are not ready for it, but because it may already know us better than we know ourselves. And the question lingers unanswered, unresolved. Why, after 70 years, do they still refuse to explain what X-12 actually was? The paper was brittle-edged, smudged, stamped in red ink. At the top, a phrase once designed to intimidate even seasoned intelligence officers. Top secret eyes only. Beneath it, a Sealan official, untraceable and never formally acknowledged. 12 stars encircling a pyramid, the eye removed. In the center, a single line typed in courier font. Majestic 12 Operations Briefing, the 18th of November, 1952. It wasn't supposed to exist, yet it did. Majestic 12, known internally as MJ-12, was allegedly formed on September 24, 1947, just weeks after the debris recovery near Roswell, New Mexico. According to the leaked documents first received by Jamie Shandera in 1984, the group was created by executive order of President Harry Truman, mandated to study the material and biological evidence retrieved from crash sites of off-world origin. Their directive: total secrecy, unlimited authority, no oversight. The names listed in those first documents read like a who's who of the post-war military-industrial elite. Vannevar Bush, the MIT physicist who once headed the Office of Scientific Research and Development. James Forrestal, Secretary of Defense, found dead under suspicious circumstances after a reported mental breakdown. Rear Admiral Roscoe Hillenkotter, First Director of the CIA, General Nathan Twining, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force, and 8 other scientists, generals, and intelligence minds, each chosen not just for their expertise, but for their allegiance to a code, compartmentalization above conscience. The original directive described MJ-12 as a special studies group, operating independently from all known government branches. Their budget was off books, their facilities secured under non-civilian jurisdiction, and their operations untraceable. Each member reportedly had unilateral authority over sub-programs buried inside other agencies, satellites to NSA satellites, Air Force transports, DOE laboratories, and even naval intelligence assets. But what elevated MJ-1 to above the usual black programs wasn't just its mission, it was its methods. The leaked memos were strange, not only for their content, but for their structure. Dated with the British format day before month, laced with peculiar phrasing not common in American military documents. Signatures that bled past the lines, initials scrawled in pencil alongside typed names, as though they had been read and reread by unseen hands. Pages carried markings like a Ryanate confirmed or Kappa threshold breach, never explained. At the heart of it all was the symbolism. Researchers noticed early that the supposed MJ-12 seal, present in several pages, bore striking resemblance to the reverse of the Great Seal of the United States. A pyramid, but instead of an eye, a dark sphere, the Latin replaced with numbers, 04071947. The Roswell crash date, embedded like a time stamp into the seal itself. Some believe it signified a new founding and invisible constitution written, not for a nation, but for a hidden order. Symbols reappeared elsewhere. Declassified documents from Project Grudge and Blue Book, while sanitized still bore anomalous letterhead and glyphs not found in standard formatting. A recurring triangle within a circle emblem, cross-referenced against recovered material from 1950s USAF counterintelligence archives. The symbol appears again, this time on a security badge worn by an unidentified scientist at Wright-Patterson. AFB, officially, MJ-12 is a hoax. The FBI has called the documents fabricated. The Air Force denies any group by that name ever existed. Yet never has a formal investigation been launched to identify the original leak. Nor has any individual been prosecuted for forging what would amount to treason-level classified material. The government simply let the idea sit, suspended, undefined, not accepted, not rejected. A myth permitted to live, but never breathe. Those who've traced MJ-1 to deeper find strange convergences. Buried in the minutes of the 1958 RAND Symposium on Interstellar Travel is a segment redacted in all public transcripts. The original unedited audio leaked from a military historian's archive contains a reference to row-class operations and a majestic review panel concerned with propulsion methods that induce reality disassociation in unshielded subjects. Reality disassociation, a phrase that would reappear in 1987 in an unrelated DOD's Psychological Operations Manual titled Operational Denial of Ontological Continuity. Though unconnected on paper, both use identical terminology to describe the effects of prolonged contact with non-human intelligences. Some believe MJ-12 was never just about technology, it was about interface. The group's real purpose, they say, was to understand and shape human perception in preparation for a post-contact civilization, but only for those selected to survive it. That's where the rituals begin. Very little is known about MJ12's internal procedures, but one document track from an intelligence cache in Brussels in 2002 details something strange, labeled MIJC atau Sel 9 Protocol. It outlines a private induction ceremony conducted in total darkness, accompanied by harmonic frequencies in the 110 to 118 Hz range. The purpose is listed as resonance realignment. Participants were required to recite an oath of conceptual loyalty not to a flag or an office, but to continuity of containment. One segment reads, "Perception shall serve architecture. Knowledge shall obey geometry. Continuity shall override anomaly." It was not the language of military briefing. It was liturgical. Other fragments suggest that MJ12 members operated under pseudonyms Theta 1 through Theta 12, interacting only under those identities when within black facilities. One unverified file, marked Xenosocial Directive, SCP-MAJ-12 Delta, speaks of a regular convergence referred to only as the Conclave. Its location, Deep Vault Cheyenne Complex Extension. Coordinates on request only. Witnesses have claimed to hear audio snippets of this ritual, recovered from a magnetic tape in a disused NORAD terminal. If real, it records 12 voices, reciting a phrase in unison. All anomalies return to pattern. We erase what we absorb. No audio analyst has ever confirmed its origin. The most persistent question about MJ12 is whether it still exists. Official denials state the group was never real. But if it wasn't, if secrecy was its foundation, then its silence would only prove its success. In 2003, British researcher Nick Pope claimed that a US official told him privately, "MJ12 never disbanded. It just changed code." In 2019, a leak from a former AATIP contractor listed a new designation, Omega Gamma Directiva, Control Schema for Contact Scenarios. Among its listed control branches was an acronym never explained, MJEX. Some interpret it as Majestic Extension. Others believe it's a new interface layer, a digital successor. Reborn and classified AI frameworks used to monitor global data for non-linear narrative infiltration. The idea is chilling. A society that no longer meets in dark rooms, but encode inside classified algorithms trained to recognize disruption. And yet, in all of the sightings, documents, and denials, one mystery remains untouched. Every insider, every leak, every transcript mentions it only in whispers. One of their rituals remains unseen by outsiders. Its name was never given. Its purpose never explained. Only one phrase was ever attached to it, typed on a loose page found inside a defunct NSA mail drop in 1994. When the black clock strikes 12, the vessel is sealed. The threshold breathes. The watchers kneel. No date, no names. Just a final line. Initiation complete. The story of Majestic 12 was never just about documents or sightings. It was about people. About those who risked their reputations, and perhaps their sanity, to bring fragments of hidden history into the light. Their motives remain contested. Their alliances are uncertain, and their truths entangled with lies. It begins with a physicist, a researcher, and a producer. Bob Lazar appeared in 1989 like a lightning strike on a local Las Vegas news broadcast under a blurred silhouette and false name. He claimed to have worked at a facility known only as S4, located just south of Area 51 near Papoose Lake. The Site was described as a covert research zone housing 9 recovered extraterrestrial craft. Lazar, hired under suspiciously rapid clearances, said his task was to reverse engineer one of the propulsion systems, a gravity amplifier operating with an element then unknown to science, element 115. At first, his claims were dismissed, but then came details that didn't belong in fiction: specific locations, access protocols, and technology like biometric hand scanners, not publicly known at the time. Over the years, some of Lazar's claims would quietly align with declassified realities, especially regarding facility layouts and security protocols. Yet questions remained. His academic background was scrubbed, his records at Caltech and MIT gone. His history with Los Alamos denied until a 1982 phone directory surfaced, proving he had worked at a key laboratory division. Lazar's motives were unclear. He claimed he came forward out of fear for his life after breaching a classified perimeter. Yet as the interviews multiplied, critics saw a man entangled in contradiction. By the early 1990s, he was selling scientific equipment and making appearances on the UFO lecture circuit. Vindication, he insisted, was his only goal, but income followed. Bill Moore's story was more complex. A researcher and co-author of the Roswell incident, Moore was among the first to investigate the idea that the 1947 crash was more than weather balloons and Cold War secrecy. Through anonymous sources, he was given pieces of the puzzle, fragments of documents, coded phrases, references to Majestic 12. One of his key contacts was Richard Doty, a U.S. Air Force Office of Special Investigations, a FOCI officer with a history of engaging civilian researchers under unofficial directives. Moore would later admit that he acted, at times, as a conduit for disinformation. In 1989, at a MUFON symposium in Las Vegas, he confessed to having worked with military intelligence to monitor and manipulate UFO researchers, especially one man, Paul Benowitz, who had uncovered sensitive data transmissions near Kirtland. AFB Benowitz was pushed into paranoia and eventual institutionalization. Moore claimed regret, but never denied his participation. Why did Moore cooperate? Some say he sought privileged access. Others believe he was manipulated himself. His ties to Doty, a known disinformation asset, blur the line between researcher and operative. At some point, it becomes unclear who was handling whom. Then there's Jaime Shandera, a television writer and producer with moderate industry ties. Shandera was, on paper, the least likely to be at the center of a black-budget revelation. Yet, in December 1984, he received a package postmarked from Albuquerque. Inside, undeveloped 35mm film. When processed, the images revealed 8 pages of what would become the foundation of the MJ-12 narrative, a presidential briefing from 1952, outlining the creation of a covert committee to study alien technology. The document named names: Bush, Forrestal, Hillenkotter. It referenced Roswell. It matched no known format yet bore all the hallmarks of classified authenticity. Shandera shared the film with Moore, and together they launched a campaign to verify and publicize the material. By 1988, they were in talks for documentaries, books, and film options. Some saw a public service, others saw opportunism. The timing of the leak coinciding with the release of UFO Cover-Up Live raised questions about orchestration. Were these men truth seekers or content creators with a very particular product? Throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s, their credibility came under fire. Skeptics pointed to inconsistencies. In the documents, the use of typefaces unavailable in the 1950s, terminologies out of place. The FBI opened an investigation, later labeling the MJ-12 memos bogus. But curiously, no charges were ever filed. No forgeries pursued. The matter was allowed to recede into ambiguity. Not confirmed, not denied. That ambiguity, many believe, was the objective. In 2001, a previously unseen document surfaced in the UK, a carbon copy of the Cutler-Twining memo, dated the 14th of July, 1954. The format British style, dating, obscure language, and classified headers mirrored the original MJ-12 documents, reigniting debates over authenticity. One strange detail stood out: the hybrid date style. Analysts who examined hundreds of declassified memos from the era found no other US military document using the same format. It was either an extraordinary forgery or a deliberate marker, a kind of signature used by insiders to signal a real leak wrapped in plausible deniability. This clue reframed the question: were Laser, Moore, and Shandera pawns in a long-game disinformation strategy? Or were they willing participants, opportunists, chasing fame, money, and the illusion of access? The deeper one looks, the harder it becomes to separate motive from manipulation. Lazar's financial troubles were mounting at the time of his revelations. His claim of seeking protection by going public makes sense, but so does the timeline of him monetizing his story. Moore's admission of being an agent of disinformation should have destroyed his credibility. Yet it paradoxically confirmed that someone in the government was engineering narratives. Shandera, despite being at the epicenter of the MJ-12 discovery, quickly faded into the background, raising questions about what he may have been told or threatened with off record. There are also signs of internal division. According to one 1992 leak allegedly from a disillusioned NSA analyst, the MJ-12 operation had splintered by the late 80s. A faction, believing public disclosure was inevitable, began planting real documents into the public domain via manipulated media figures. The strategy: blur the truth so thoroughly with hoaxes, half-truths, and theater that the public would never be able to distinguish signal from noise. In that sense, Lazar, Moore, and Shandera were not the authors of a hoax. They were its delivery system, and perhaps unknowingly its casualties. At the center of every major disclosure is a choice: to reveal what you know, or to play the role assigned to you. Fear keeps secrets buried. Greed digs them up. But the line is thin. What if the MJ-12 documents were seeded with errors on purpose? To discredit them, but to protect the reality they hinted at. What if the contradictions in Lazar's story were engineered not by him, but by the people who handled his clearance and erased his past? What if Moore's access to Doty wasn't collaboration but containment? And what if Shandera, the most quiet of them all, was never the target, but the channel? One question haunts all three: were they driven by fear or by greed? The documents can't answer, the agencies won't respond, and the truth, as always, remains trapped between redaction and revelation. Asterisk. It arrived without warning. A single brown envelope, unmarked, slid through a mail slot in Los Angeles. Inside, a canister of undeveloped 35mm film. The recipient, Jaime Shandera, was a television producer with an interest in UFO history. No idea that what he held would ignite one of the most enduring controversies in conspiracy lore. When developed, the film revealed a typed memorandum bearing the seal of the United States government. Dated the 18th of November 1952, it was marked top secret eyes only. The header read, Briefing Document, Operation Majestic 12. It was addressed to President-elect Dwight D. Eisenhower. The document, now known as the Eisenhower Briefing Document, or EBD, introduced the public to a classified world that had until then lived only in whispered speculation. It described the formation of a covert working group, Group Majestic 12, established by executive authority in 1947. After the recovery of an extraterrestrial vehicle near Roswell, New Mexico. The 12 members listed were elite generals, scientists, intelligence operatives, including names like Vannevar Bush, James Forrestal, and General Hoyt Vandenberg. Their mission was clear: concealment, recovery, exploitation. One line, in particular, stood out, both in tone and implication. Pursue advanced propulsion research, as outlined under Project Gleam. The wording was surgical. The classification level, unmistakable. Top secret eyes only. The typeface, the formatting, the hierarchical signatures, designed to evoke the cold, bureaucratic realism of an official intelligence briefing. But, from the moment it surfaced, the EBD raised alarms. How did a civilian receive such a document, years after the Cold War's most critical files had been sealed or destroyed? Why was the medium film chosen instead of paper? And why did the document reference programs and designations that had never been revealed in any known declassified archive? Shandera brought the film to Bill Moore, already deep in his own investigations surrounding Roswell and military disinformation. Together, they shared the contents with Stanton Friedman, the nuclear physicist turned ufologist. The three formed a makeshift validation network, independent, determined, and unequipped to fully authenticate what they had just unearthed. For some, the document was the smoking gunner confirmation of everything the government had denied. For others, it was too convenient, too cinematic, too perfect. Philip J. Klass, a senior editor and veteran aerospace journalist with Skeptical Inquirer, launched a forensic analysis of the EBD. He dissected the document's language, its structure, even its ink reproduction patterns. His findings were damning. The signature attributed to Admiral Hillenkotter appeared to have been traced or photocopied from a publicly available memo. The typeface, according to Klass, did not match official military documents from the 1950s. The format of the date, the 18th of November 1952, followed British convention, not American military standards. To Klass, the document was a forgery, a hoax, but not everyone agreed. Typographic inconsistencies, while suggestive, were not definitive. U.S. intelligence often operated under varying document formats, particularly when drafting memos for interagency use, and signatures being copied from other memos. That alone proved little. Classified drafts often reused known bureaucratic structures before final approval. Some argued that such anomalies might have been inserted intentionally, as part of an internal, limited hangout, a deliberate leak embedded with forensic breadcrumbs, meant to sow confusion while transmitting real content. What complicates the matter further is the Annex X21 reference. Within the EBD line instructs, personnel must reference Annex X21 for biological and containment protocols. Yet no such annex has ever been released. Its naming convention does not match any standard annex structure in known National Security Council documentation. No public archive contains reference to an X21 or its associated material, but in 1993, an anonymous PDF circulated through underground bulletin board systems claiming to include fragments of X-21. Inside were procedural diagrams for dealing with non-human biomatter, containment rituals involving Faraday cages, and psychotronic shielding during autopsy operations. The file was quickly denounced as a hoax, but its diagrams matched descriptions given years earlier by Bob Lazar and others who claimed to have worked near S4. Meanwhile, ufologist circles began circulating photocopy kits, packets of the MJ-12 documents bundled with commentary, speculative annotations, and supposed decoding guides. Some were sincere attempts to crowdsource analysis. Others were clear fabrications. One version of the EBD included a handwritten margin note, awaiting Prometheus clearance, VPA approved, not signed. The note's ink appeared decades newer than the typed content. Another version contained a symbol not present in the original scan, a black triangle flanked by two inverted wings, matching a patch seen on Groom Lake contractors' flight suits. Photographed from long-range lenses in 1998, the more the document spread, the less stable it became. Each copy introduced noise, but within that noise, researchers believed were embedded truths. In 2000, a scanned page from an alleged NSA file appeared on an encrypted Russian web forum. It contained a cryptographic table of frequencies, next to which was a redacted operations flowchart titled EBD Amplicity Protocol. The footer date, the 20th of July, 1985, just months after the EBD was first revealed. The chart included a term not seen elsewhere, NHI reversal artifact. In intelligence circles, NHI had become shorthand for non-human intelligence. The implication that the Eisenhower briefing document may have originated from within, an active analysis program still in existence decades later. Then, in 2009, another layer of mystery was added. A document obtained through a Freedom of Information Act. Requests heavily redacted referred to a document Q87, currently under compartmental review by DIA Magic liaisons, though the agency name Magic had never been confirmed as real. The fact that the DIA acknowledged liaison oversight at all triggered a new wave of inquiries. Subsequent FOJA attempts for document Q87 were rejected under national security exemptions. The Eisenhower briefing document, if real, would have been the foundation for a doctrine of permanent concealment, a policy mandate that every U.S. administration since Truman may have inherited without ever being allowed to override. That alone explains the stakes. But still, one issue remains unaddressed. Multiple researchers, including Friedman and Moore, confirmed that the EBD had redactions lines that appeared blacked out within the typewritten text itself. Not by Sharpie, not by photocopy blur, but by overtyped X-marker, mechanical redaction method used only in typewriter eras for internal drafts not yet approved for reproduction. The redacted lines cannot be read, but in at least two places. They cover what appears to be entire sections, perhaps half a page between confirmed paragraphs. One of the blacked out lines ends with a partial word visible beyond the last X. CE of retro_phenomena remain unverified. The missing fragment, unknown. The original source film, lost. Chandra claimed the roll was stolen from his personal archive in the mid-1990s, and with it, the most critical lines of the MJ-12 saga may have been erased. If the Eisenhower briefing document was a forgery, it was forged with precision. To precise, some argue, the language mimicked classified style, dispassionate, bureaucratic, carefully deniable. It avoided sensational claims. It never once used the word alien. Instead, extraterrestrial biological entities. The acronym EBE appears only once, buried in a parenthetical, as though casually inserted. It was as if the author, whoever they were, wanted credibility above spectacle, wanted plausibility more than shock. The full list of directives from the EBD, once cross-referenced against later leaks, shows eerie consistency. The call to pursue advanced propulsion research predates known public DARPA programs, like the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, AATIP, by decades. The mention of containment logistics overlaps with language seen years later in the leaked Defense Intelligence reference documents. One particularly strange match comes from a 2010 DIA study discussing non-conventional lift systems, exhibiting mass reduction characteristics. It echoes a clause in the EBD describing vehicle systems which defy inertial constraints. Patterns begin to emerge not of confirmation, but of convergence. Even more unsettling are the gaps. Entire passages of the EBD are missing, redacted by hand, but mechanically struck through. Pages that should run top to bottom suddenly halt mid-sentence. Transitions that break logic. Section headings left with no subordinate content. One page ends abruptly, until such time as containment exceeds predictive thresholds established by redacted. But the redaction wasn't digital. It was physical, typed over, perhaps on purpose, perhaps by necessity. What lies beneath has never been recovered. In the 1990s, an archivist working in partnership with UFO researcher Linda Moulton Howe claimed to have received a partial unredacted version of the EBD via anonymous courier. The copy was different, not on microfilm, but carbon reproduction paper. It included a paragraph not found in the publicly circulated version. Operations near Site Zeta have encountered interference from what appears to be localized distortion of baseline reality metrics. All personnel advised to undergo cognitive filtration post-exposure. This line was never confirmed. Asterisk. The document disappeared shortly after Howe attempted to validate its authenticity. The courier was never identified. Her source silent ever since. Even more cryptic are the references buried in document metadata. A file hosted on a private server by researcher Ryan S. would included a watermark visible only under specific RGB values. MJI CTERTA _ classification NX21 breach protocol Nova key. No such project code has ever been acknowledged in open source defense documents, but the style matches known internal Pentagon encryption syntax used during Gulf War era satellite transmissions. Another fragment surfaced from the Cutler-Twining memo one-page note supposedly dated the 14th of July 1954, found in the National Archives by Shandera and Moore. Though lacking a signature, the memo includes phrases like NSC Directive 5412 halves and refers obliquely to unacknowledged research compartments requiring majestic oversight. Skeptics argued that no such directive referenced majestic in any official capacity. Yet declassified documents confirm NSC 5412 halves did authorize covert operations bypassing congressional review and formal budget disclosures. It was, in essence, the blueprint for plausible deniability. If Majestic 12 existed, it would have lived inside such architecture. The deeper question isn't just whether the EBD is real, it's what kind of leak it represents. Some within intelligence circles believe it was a controlled leaker, kind of psychological inoculation, a limited hangout. Give the public something true, but unverifiable. Let the noise drown the signal. Engineer a landscape where no fact can be confirmed and no lie can be fully disproved. And in that chaos bury the real agenda. A declassified 1961 CIA Psychological Operations Manual contains a doctrine known as cognitive compartmentalization via inconsistency exposure. The theory exposes subject to conflicting truths so often and so forcefully that they retreat into disbelief. Not disbelief of the lie, but disbelief of everything. The MJ-12 documents did exactly that. By the early 2000s, hoax kits were flooding the UFO community. Some were traced to known skeptics. Others worryingly were tied to disinformation cells within intelligence contracting firms. One such packet, traced to a P.O. box in Maryland, included a fake follow-up to the EBD referencing Operation Crystal Mirror and Project Lotus Bloom. Both were fiction, but mixed into the kit was a page lifted directly from an authentic 1953 CIA remote viewing assessment buried so deep that only researchers with access to cold war microfiche archives would recognize it. Why bury a real document inside a fake one? Unless the goal was to test who noticed. The EBD continues to generate division. To skeptics, it remains the crown jewel of Cold War hoaxes, brilliantly constructed, but ultimately fraudulent. To researchers, it is the Rosetta Stone of a hidden history, one carefully bled into the public in pieces, under layers of contradiction and calculated absurdity. But one truth holds. No other leaked document has carried such weight for so long without resolution. And through it all, one detail still stands unanswered. Those overtyped lines, those missing passages, those redacted names. They aren't redacted in black ink. They're missing from the source itself. If someone, long before the leak, had decided which parts could survive exposure, the most critical lines gone. Not to protect national security, but to protect something older, something still classified, something the public was never meant to see, and just barely didn't. Asterisk. My name isn't important. Let's just say I was a civilian contractor working underground at a site most folks have only heard about in passing S4, just south of Groom Lake, Nevada. They brought me in through RECO, Reynolds Electrical and Engineering Company, like most of us back then. I was a maintenance tech, officially. Janitorial detail, unofficially. 1989. We weren't supposed to ask questions. You got your section, you stuck to it. You wore the color-coded badge they gave you and didn't wander. Eyes down, gloves on. They paid us well, and we kept our mouths shut. But sometimes the door you're not supposed to open opens anyway. It was late past 1 a.m. I was on night rotation, second week into the month. They had me on Level 3, near the curved corridors with the beige epoxy floors. That place never felt like any government site I'd been in. The walls were too smooth, the lights too white. No pipes, no vents, just silence and buzz. I was pushing a service cart toward one of the auxiliary labs when the lights flickered. Not a full outage, just enough to make the fluorescence dim for a second, like the air got thicker. Then I heard it, that hum, low, steady, like a tuning fork vibrating deep in your chest. Not loud, but you felt it. My radio crackled, but no voice came through. The lab door ahead was open. That wasn't normal. Usually, if something high was going on, those doors sealed like vaults. But this time, it was ajar, maybe 6 inches. Enough to see I shouldn't have looked. I know that now. Inside, under overhead lights, there was a disc maybe 30 feet across, propped up on a cradle like a museum piece. Its surface was metallic but dull, not chrome, not steel, almost like ceramic, but it shimmered faintly like it was resisting the light around it. What got me was the smell. Not fuel, not metal. Something like burnt ozone or ionized air after a lightning strike. It stung my nose, metallic and sharp. Two guys in white radiation suits were walking around it, holding something like electromagnetic paddles. As they passed near the base of the disc, I saw the air bend, not visibly, but you could feel a shift in pressure. My ears popped. Static filled the hallway behind me. That's when I froze. My knees locked. I'd been around jets, around reactors, around all kinds of tech. This wasn't like any jet I'd ever cleaned around. Then I heard voices, urgent, clipped. A supervisor shouting, "Clear the corridor." I slammed my cart into reverse and ducked into a maintenance closet. Stayed there, heart pounding, until the hallway went quiet again. Later that night, back in the break room bunker, I told one of the other techs what I saw. He didn't look surprised. He just nodded and said, "You got too close to Hangar 4. That one's hot this month." Then he told me not to bring it up again. I didn't, but I started noticing things after that. Like how the floor plans didn't match the corridors we were assigned to, or how some halls had no reflection in the floor polish, no matter how clean they were. I once passed a wall with no seam, no panel, just smooth steel, but my cart's wheels squeaked like I passed through a magnetic gate. My fillings ached, then it stopped. There was always that hum, low, deep, the kind that makes your bones itch. I worked there 9 months. Quit after I saw a man escorted out in cuffs for asking too many questions about a damaged floor tile. Said he found metal flakes underneath that weren't on any supply manifest. After that, I kept my head down, took the NDA, took the cash out, got out. Years later, I saw leaked footage on a grainy reel someone posted through a private researcher's archive. The timestamp was off, but I knew the place, that corridor, that hatch, that same damned hum layered under the audio. You couldn't fake it, not that pressure drop, not that smell. Someone captured it. Briefly, they wiped the paper trail. My payroll records, gone. The building code assignments I had, no longer valid, but someone out there knows what they saw, and if they're listening, I wasn't the only one. I was just the one who looked. My name is Linda Halvorsen. I was a telemetry analyst stationed at White Sands Missile Range in the late 1970s. In 81, I was temporarily reassigned under contract to a classified airspace tracking project, connected unofficially to activities near Groom Lake. They didn't call it Area 51 in the paperwork. It was just Special Test Range 4. But we all knew where the feeds were coming from. Back then, I was one of the only women in our division. I kept to myself, did my job. We monitored object flight data, mostly radar returns, trajectory plots, sonic profiles. 90% of it was routine, but there were that still don't make sense. It was May 19th, 1981, late evening. A test flight was scheduled, classified vehicle from Groom, inbound telemetry expected at 2,300 hours. We were monitoring return data from 3 separate stations. The signal came in as expected, but what we saw on the screen didn't match anything we'd tracked before. The object didn't accelerate. It appeared at 86,000 feet, traveling at 9,800 knots. Then it stopped, mid-air. No deceleration signature. No heat plume. The IR scope barely registered it. It just was. I radioed to confirm with another station, thinking it was a glitch. Before I could even finish, a voice-deep, firm cut across the secured frequency. Terminate trace. Lock on override. This return is classified Tier 1. Tier 1 was not something we ever heard spoken aloud. It meant above our clearance. Above anyone's clearance, short of joint special access channels. I froze. We all did. The screen blanked. The radar loop was scrubbed. The data erased in front of us. No backup, just white noise where an anomaly had been. After that night, strange things started happening. New people showed up in our wing. Not military, not civilian. They wore badges with no names. Just red stripes, top to bottom. One of them pulled me aside after shift and asked how often I practiced memory exercises. When I said never, he nodded and said, "We may need you in the field, Linda." I didn't ask what that meant. 2 weeks later, I was sent to a secure facility near Tanapa. Inside, I was shown what they called telemetry artifacts. I thought it meant flight path charts. It wasn't. It was data we couldn't read. Strings that looped on analog reels, layered with frequencies that emitted low vibrations. One loop made my ears ring for days. Another made me nauseous within seconds. I was told to listen, observe, and record sensations. Nothing else. They called it neurological imprint mapping. I called it wrong. In a room 2 floors down cold, dim, lead-lined walls, saw something I was never supposed to see. It was inside a transparent polyglass tank, floating a fragment of metal small, like a child's helmet, but its shape was impossible. Faceted curves that changed slightly depending on where you stood. I walked clockwise around it, and the shadows inside the tank moved. They weren't reflections. They were distortions, like the object bent light in different temporal frames. One moment, it looked silver, the next, black. And then, it wasn't there at all. They told me it was debris from a vehicle recovered in '47, from the New Mexico site. I wasn't allowed to speak for 72 hours after that. Monitored, debriefed daily, then quietly reassigned to a weather telemetry unit in Utah. Years later, in 1995, a researcher named Dr. Eric Hole published a paper on quantum resonance metals with phase shift geometries. When I saw the diagrams, I froze. It was the same object, same internal angles. He said the images came from unverified archival footage. I knew better. I had seen it with my own eyes. I've never been able to prove what happened. I was a technician, a quiet observer. But that object, whatever it wasn't made here. And the data we were decoding wasn't for weapons. It was for communication, not between people, between systems, between intelligence and interface. We weren't just tracking objects. We were listening to something else, something alive. And buried inside those frequencies was a message we were never meant to hear. My name is Thomas A. Keane. I was a structural engineer for EG&G Special Projects. If you know the name, you know what we were involved in: test ranges, prototype infrastructure, and high containment systems. Most of my assignments were standard: blast bunkers, underground labs, variable density enclosures for classified propulsion. Nothing unusual. That changed in late 1992. I was flown in on a C-1302 McCarran under civilian cover. The manifest listed me as an aerospace acoustics consultant, which I wasn't, but the real job was different. I was taken north under armed escort black Suburbans, tinted glass, no IDs through the Nellis perimeter, past Mercury, to a site labeled Echo 5. We didn't call it Area 51. We weren't allowed to use the term. Internally, it was Facility Theta. The hangar we were taken to was cut directly into bedrock. Massive structure. Seamless walls. This wasn't built for jets. It was built to contain. Our task was simple, on paper. Reinforce the chamber. Beneath Hangar D with anti-vibration plating and structural dampeners. No blueprints. Just a set of measurements and tolerance as far beyond what any aircraft would need. The deeper we got, the stranger it became. At the lowest level, we entered a chamber roughly 60 feet wide, octagonal in shape. In the center, a cylindrical support ring embedded into the floor hollow, metallic, ringed with copper tungsten mesh. No obvious function, but around it were anchors, dozens of them, like you'd see in a rocket test bed. Only these weren't built to resist thrust. They were built to channel it. Every 18 minutes, the temperature dropped exactly 2.4 degrees. Fahrenheit, timed, not environmental, induced. You could feel it in your teeth, shot metallic cold that wasn't natural. Like the heat was being pulled out of the air in regular pulses. Then came the light. We were laying secondary mounts near the central structure when the overhead fluorescence failed. Not flickered, failed. Every bulb dimmed to zero. No sound. No delay. We heard something rise in the silence. A tonal trellosa bass felt more than heard. And then, in the center ring, a shimmer. Not light, not reflection. Something else. The air rippled, like a heat wave in reverse. A technician dropped his wrench. It floated. For 1, maybe 2 seconds, the tool hovered, half an inch off the concrete. No vibration, no trick, just gravity. Gone. Everyone stood still. No one said a word. Then the lights snapped back. The wrench clanged down, the air cleared, and the escort team told us to stop work for the day. The next morning, our instructions had changed. New priorities. Reinforced the containment perimeter, sealed the central ring. No explanation, no acknowledgement of what we'd seen. Later that week, a colleague pulled me aside, said the site used to house Object Sigma 7, a recovered asset, stored since the 1970s. No flight surfaces, no rivets. The skin reacted to ambient M fields. The last test, he said, caused a full blackout of sublevel 4. Time codes desinced, instruments failed, and afterward, a security officer reported hearing his own voice before he spoke. They moved. Sigma 7 to another site after that. What we were reinforcing, I believe, was residual. You can't prove these things. The contracts were verbal. The logs were coded. The floor plans changed daily. But I kept one thing, an original materials manifest printed on dot matrix paper. It listed standard alloys for the first 2 pages. But on page 3, under core, structure, one item stands alone. Material ID, QX77NEM. Provenance, extrinsic. Handling protocol, class Delta. Cognitive shielding required. That's not aerospace language. That's something else. I left EG&G in '95. Haven't spoken publicly since. But I know what I saw. And I know what they were afraid of. It wasn't flight. It wasn't energy. It was time. Time behaving wrong. Localized effects. Feedback loops. Reality ripples. Like the artifact wasn't just recovered, was still connected to somewhere else, and we were just visitors. Temporary. I've lived with this for decades. No books, no cameras, just memory and the hum still in my ears. Low, steady, waiting. I'm Dr. Marcus Vale. I held a level for clearance under a joint Doe and Dodd biocognitive interface program in the late 90s. My specialty was neuroelectrical feedback, essentially how the brain reacts under high stimulus. Electromagnetic fields. My assignment was at a location west of Groom Lake. We weren't told the site's name, but the coordinates aligned with the perimeter of what civilians call S4. My orders came directly from a black-labeled directive, titled Project Ramjet. At first, it sounded like high-speed telemetry work. That was deliberate. Once inside, I realized we weren't testing aircraft or human pilots. We were monitoring something we didn't build. It started with Subject 9. He wasn't military. Civilian, early 30s, volunteers sourced through a proxy behavioral contractor in Virginia. Clean record, high IQ, no mental health flags. The perfect blank slate. His role, interface, exposure. We placed him in a room with a single device classified as Cognitive Resonant Artifact 3, or CRA3. It looked inert, metallic, size of a football, but smooth, like poured mercury-hardened midfall. It emitted no heat, no vibration. But when Subject 9 entered the room, his vitals changed before he made contact. Heart rate up, theta brainwaves spiked. He reported a pressure in his ears, then a voice, not external, internal, not speaking, but suggesting. He described it as knowing a sentence before it's spoken. The session lasted for minutes. On review, his EEG signature was non-standard, a waveform we couldn't classify. Not epileptic, not meditative, something else. The room's ambient M field, previously stable, shifted upward by 6 microslices. That's not random. That's a reaction. When we questioned him afterward, Subject 9 was too calm, as if he had rehearsed his answers. He said the artifact wanted to teach. When pressed further, he said, "It's not a thing, it's a listener." The next day, he stopped sleeping. That's when I began to realize we weren't studying the artifact. It was studying us. I filed a deviation report. My supervisor, a man who went only by the name Harris, pulled me aside and said, "You're not here to evaluate threats. You're here to measure adaptation curves." I asked, "Adaptation to what?" He said, "To the contact event already in progress." That's when I understood. We weren't preparing for contact. It had already happened. The CRA3 device was inert because its function wasn't mechanical, it was relational. It responded to minds, to intentions. I reviewed old logs going back to the 1970s. Different subjects, different sites, same reactions, voice impressions, visual bleed-through, even dreams shared across multiple test groups, described before any cross-contamination could have occurred. They were all seeing the same shape, an inverted tetrahedron, suspended in liquid blackness, rotating silently. A pulse once every 6 seconds. And then, always, a whisper. Return pattern achieved. We weren't conducting science. We were participating in ritual. After 3 more sessions, Subject 9 was removed. Reason, psychological instability. What they didn't say was that he started speaking in a language no one recognized. His words were documented phonetically, and a linguist from Los Alamos concluded that the syntax resembled inverse Hebrew morphology combined with low-frequency tonal modulation. We never saw him again. They replaced him with Subject 10, then Subject 11, each session shorter than the last, each producing more profound M disturbances. I filed a request for reassignment. It was denied. In March 2000, I resigned. 4 days later, I received a visit at home. 2 men, no names. No threats, just a warning. You never interfaced. You only observed. They said it 3 times, like it was a script. I nodded. They left. I've never published any of this. No photos, no samples. The documentation doesn't exist anymore. The logs were air-gapped and held in sealed drives under Project Velum. But I remember the waveforms. I remember the way Subject 9 looked through. The glass. He wasn't afraid. He was aware, as if something else was already there with him in the room. And maybe had been all along. You don't forget that. You can't. My name is Elijah Rourke. Captain, United States Air Force, retired. I served from 1983 through 2004. My last active assignment was at the Tonopah Test Range, but in 1997, I was transferred temporarily to a location northeast of Groom Lake. They called it a Joint Systems Observation Rotation, but it wasn't an observation, it was containment. I was brought in because of my background in aerospace recovery. Ops. I'd handled downed stealth platforms, crash sites, even retrieval exercises involving classified debris. But nothing prepared me for what I saw out there, and nothing explained what it was we were supposed to do about it. The site itself was minimalist. 1 runway, 2 hangars. The real structure was underground. We called it the vault. You had to pass 2 biometric checks to get in. The corridors were narrow, silent, to clean. Lights embedded in the floor, not the ceiling. And always, that feeling like the air had weight. On the 2nd day of my rotation, I was cleared to view what the handlers referred to only as payload echo. We weren't told where it came from. We weren't told when it arrived. It was already there when I got there. I'll never forget what it looked like, roughly 18 feet across, metallic kind of. Its surface wasn't like any composite I've seen. It looked soft, almost wet. But when I got close, it was solid. My flashlight didn't reflect off it. The beam disappeared, like the object was absorbing light frequencies. I've seen radar-absorbent material before. This wasn't that. This was deeper. What disturbed me most was the way the interior shifted. I don't mean physically, I mean perceptually. You looked through an access port, and it was one layout. You blinked, looked again, and it was different. I watched an entire access wall reconfigure in silence. No hinges, no motors, just a fold like origami moving backward. In time, the others were clinical. They recorded observations. I stood there, stuck. That night, I had a dream. Not like a normal one, more like a broadcast. A dark field. Stars above. Something massive just above the edge of vision. I wasn't alone. There were others, human shapes, and something behind them, watching. When I woke up, the digital clock next to my bed was static, not off, not malfunctioning, just static. I checked my watch. It had reset, defaulted to 0 o'clock. My personal laptop, locked, with a single line of code blinking across the screen. Synchronization interrupted. I reported it to my commanding officer. He nodded, said nothing, handed me a sheet to sign. A new NDA, higher level. I was told not to return to sublevel 2. The following week, I assisted in a transport drill. We weren't told what we were moving. The cargo was sealed in a titanium core shell, covered in thermal sheeting. 4 men escorted it with magnetically sealed rifles I'd never seen before. No markings, no safety switches, One of them turned to me and said, "If it moves, don't shoot, run." He wasn't joking. We loaded the shell into a modified C-17. Destination undisclosed. I watched it disappear into the sky and felt a weight lift like something had left with it. Years later, I saw documents through a private contact slides labeled Payload Echo Phenomenon Stability. Metrics. One line stood out. Entity response tied to observer proximity. Avoid direct cognition beyond 40 seconds. What does that mean, direct cognition? To this day, I don't know if we were handling a craft, a life form, or something in between, something sentient, but non-biologically responsive, but not alive, not in the way we understand it. And I can't tell you how many others saw what I saw. Most won't speak. Some didn't make it out, but I did. And every now and then, when I close my eyes, I still see that shimmer in the dark. That shape just outside of light. It didn't want to be found. It was waiting, and now. I wonder if it still is. Call me Nina. That's not my real name, but it's what I've used since leaving the program. From 2006 to 2010. I was a field medic assigned to a rapid response unit contracted through a defense biocontainment group. We didn't wear flags. Our patches were black. Our files were numbered, not named. We didn't ask where we were going, we were just told when to be ready. One of those nights, the call came in while we were in Colorado. We were wheels up in 30 minutes. No manifest, no mission brief, just coordinates and dosage kits. We landed at Night Nevada desert, judging by the terrain. Flat, dry, nothing. But darkness. They drove us blindfolded for over an hour. When the blindfold came off, we were inside a facility. No signs, no clocks. Concrete walls, lead overheads. Cold, the kind of cold that doesn't come from climate control. The kind that feels pressurized. We were handed oxygen masks not for toxins, they said, but neural stabilization. One of the senior techs warned us, don't fixate. If it doesn't look right, look away. I didn't know what that meant until I saw it. The patient or subject maybe was already in the chamber when we arrived. Male, early 40s, shaved head, ID banded but name redacted. He was restrained but not struggling. His eyes weren't blinking, just locked onto the wall as if staring at something no one else could see. Vitals were erratic, not high, just wrong. His pulse would spike, then stop. Not slow down. Stop, then resume like nothing happened. One of the monitors showed an ECG signature that looped on itself, like a glitch. The waveform didn't track time correctly. Then he spoke. He said, "It's talking in echoes." We asked what he meant. He said, "The object, it speaks by repeating, but not in sound, in memory." I asked if he could describe it. He said he didn't have to, it was already doing that for him. He described images, a hallway with no end, stairs that led down and returned to the same place, lights that hummed in Morse code. He said it was all a test, that we were being watched. For resonance, I took his blood. It was warm to warm. Core temp should have been hypothermic, but he was spiking at 109 degrees Fahrenheit with no sweat, no shivering. His pupils were dilated, but his body showed no fight or flight signs, just calm, until he whispered something that made me freeze. He said, "You're going to see it too. They all do." I stepped back. The wall behind him wasn't a wall anymore. It rippled, briefly, like water under glass. I saw what looked like depth, possible depth, not space, time. like there were layers behind the concrete, bleeding through. And I swear, just for a second I saw myself. Same posture, same uniform, but older, pale, watching me from the other side. Then it was gone, just concrete. I finished the report, sealed the med pack, and walked out without a word. None of us spoke in the transport. When we were debriefed, the officer said, "You were exposed to a perceptual bleed. No cause for concern. Symptoms may include repeating dreams, displaced memory, or auditory overlay. Should pass in 30 days. They said it so casually, like they'd said it 100 times. 3 nights later, I had the dream. A hallway, a mirror, no reflection, just light. Then a voice not in my ears, but inside the silence, returned to pattern. I left the program within the year. I never signed another NDA. I never went back, but I never forgot, and I never stopped hearing it. Even now, when I close my eyes too long, I see the wall ripple again, and I'm still there, watching. Dr. Jessica Harding, an aerospace physicist with a doctorate from the University of Colorado Boulder, had long operated within the boundaries of advanced propulsion theory and electromagnetic wave behavior. Her work, published and classified, alike often dealt with fringe performance regimes, high altitude, thermodynamic efficiency, stealth material absorption coefficients, directed energy mitigation. But the anomaly from 1992-1 she first reviewed under contract in a redacted DARPA project was different. It didn't test the limits of known science. It contradicted them. The anomaly appeared in a radar reflectivity chart pulled from TANAPA Test Range's deep radar observation files. The data, buried in a classified telemetry segment labeled Event ECA7, recorded a high-altitude object traveling in excess of Mach 3.6 at 74,000 feet. These numbers, while impressive, weren't unprecedented for the time. Several black programs, possibly under the rumored Aura umbrella, could have approached similar speeds. But what couldn't be explained was the radar cross-sectional RCS. According to the raw returns, the object demonstrated not just reduced visibility, but negative visibility. In simple terms, the object didn't reflect radar waves it subtracted from them. Across a wide band of microwave and millimeter wave frequencies, the object's return signature dipped below atmospheric baseline. No known material, stealth, coating, or electromagnetic jamming suite behaves this way. Harding reviewed the logs with a team of graduate researchers. The pattern repeated itself. The object appeared briefly as a soft-edged blur, then vanished from radar entirely while maintaining speed and altitude. Attempts to recalibrate gain or phase correction algorithms made no difference. The signal didn't scatter, it simply absorbed and cancelled radar energy, returning an absence rather than an echo. Under normal physics, that's impossible. Even cutting-edge stealth aircraft like the B-2 Spirit or experimental low observable UAVs still produce a detectable signature edges, Doppler distortions, or residual wavefront turbulence. What this object produced was a mobile null point. Some dismissed the data as artifact, atmospheric interference, signal masking, faulty receivers. These were the go-to counter-arguments. Dr. Alan Cross, a longtime skeptic and aerospace consultant for several legacy stealth programs, claimed the anomaly was most likely tied to unreported plasma envelope experiments. According to Cross, it was possible that the Air Force had been experimenting with ionized gas shells to distort radar reflection and mask thermal signatures. But Harding rejected this explanation. Plasma distortion may alter wave returns, she explained. but it does not produce adaptive invisibilities, especially not across broadband radar platforms operated simultaneously. Her models showed something else. The object's radar signature changed, dynamically decreasing when incoming wave energy increased, and inversely expanding when surveillance systems downshifted their frequency range. It was, by every metric she measured, responsive. And that, Harding argued, wasn't a coincidence. That was intent. The more she studied the 1992 telemetry logs, the more she noticed this pattern, a consistent, real-time modulation of reflectivity based on the environment. As if the object not only knew it was being watched, but actively decided how much to be seen. That level of behavior couldn't come from passive stealth. It required intelligence, whether that intelligence was housed in onboard AI or intrinsic. To the material itself, some form of metamaterial that sensed and reacted to electromagnetic energy remained unknown. But Harding's internal report, classified and buried inside a contractor-level subfolder, labeled AM94, Band Reversal Phenomenology, included a chilling line in the conclusion. Observed cross-section behavior is consistent with a cognitively adaptive platform. That line was later redacted in the final version distributed to Dodd Partners. Harding saw the edit herself. The redacted sentence was replaced with a footnote citing experimental wavelet interference theory, a placeholder explanation that sounded technical but explained nothing. What remained behind, however, was the core data. Indelible, repeated. Measured, the object behaved as if it knew. Following the restricted review of the 1992 radar anomaly, Dr. Jessica Harding began cross-referencing archived telemetry with known experimental airframe profiles from Lockheed, Northrop, and Boeing. None matched. The object's maneuverability, specifically its non-ballistic trajectory, was an outlier among thousands of logged tests. It exhibited no arc, no descent compensation, no flutter or turbulence displacement. The recorded flight path was linear, crisp, and unaffected by known atmospheric drag equations. Harding attempted to recreate the anomaly in simulation, adjusting variables such as wind shear, pressure gradients, and radar elevation differentials. Every outcome failed to reproduce the original signal void. It wasn't just that the object had no radar return, it was that it appeared to change the environment around it. At one point in the signal, even background clutter was suppressed, as if the object distorted not just radar reflectivity, but the airspace itself. That brought Harding to her most controversial conclusion. The object was exerting field-based influence beyond passive electromagnetic interaction. It was, in effect, shaping the sensory field around itself, not with power or propulsion, but with information. She proposed the term informational distortion envelope, a theoretical construct that would allow an object to manipulate how it was perceived, not just through sensors, but by systems that model space and time. She wasn't the only one to come to similar conclusions. In a classified research colloquium held at Los Alamos in 1995, two separate analysts from the Defense Intelligence Agency presented a briefing on anomalous aerospace telemetry. One of their case studies referenced the same 1992 radar chart, describing the object as operating in localized physics-deficient space, though never explained in detail. The term suggested that certain flight conditions observed were not bound by Newtonian or even relativistic limits. This was quietly echoed years later in a footnote buried in one of the Defense Intelligence reference documents. DRDs prepared for the now exposed AATIP program. One document, titled Advanced Theoretical Metrics for Exotic Aerospace Platforms, included the following passage. Observed flight behavior in anomalous returns includes non-inertial acceleration, gravity null vectors, and perception adaptive emissions. These characteristics suggest cognitive interface or non-human origin. Though it never referenced the 1992 event directly, Harding recognized the language. It matched her own. Still, not everyone accepted her interpretation. The scientific community remains divided. Dr. Alan Cross continued to challenge her findings publicly, publishing a lengthy rebuttal in Aviation Technology Quarterly, in which he accused her of blurring the lines between speculation and data. His article claimed misalignment between time-stamped returns and sensor calibration logs, but Harding responded in kind, releasing calibration overlays that showed no such misalignment existed. She publicly challenged Cross to a joint review. Of the original radar tapes on offer, he declined. Years passed. Harding stepped back from government consulting, but continued teaching advanced propulsion theory. Occasionally, she still receives anonymous packages, card copies, printouts, radar scattergrams, without metadata. She never knows who sends them, but the signals are always familiar, always wrong in the same ways. One packet she received in 2017 included a frame B-frame enhancement of the 1992 event. It showed the object briefly appearing not as a void, but as a shape, irregular, asymmetric, and briefly reflective. For 3 frames, just before vanishing, it reflected a signal that formed a near-perfect spiral geometry Fibonacci. That signal was visible only when overlaid with a narrowband 35 GHz burster band not used in the original radar sweep. That discovery was never published. Harding keeps the printout in her private archive, filed under one word: contact. 2. This day, the 1992 anomaly remains unsolved. It is still listed in internal Air Force logs under a subcategory known as Transient Signature Event, Type Theta. No other incident on record carries that designation. And Dr. Harding, though retired from active government work, remains convinced. This wasn't a stealth test. It wasn't a plasma envelope. It wasn't a glitch. It was something watching us. How much of itself to reveal? So the question remains, unanswered and unresolved. Was that radar signal a ghost in the machine? Or was it the signature of a deeper truth, one too advanced to be hidden, and too alien to be understood? To the untrained eye, it is little more than a runway in the Nevada desert, nestled between ridgelines and etched into satellite photos as a no-name patch of restricted terrain. But behind the scorched earth and camouflaged hangars lies something far older than Cold War secrecy, something embedded in the very architecture of denial. Groom Lake, officially designated as an open training range by the United States Air Force, has no civilian access, no listed coordinates, and no public infrastructure. The airspace above it designated are 4808 UNIs, among the most heavily restricted in the world. What is denied there is not just entry, but knowledge itself. Since the 1950s, the base has served as a testing site for black budget programs, the U-2, SR-71, F-117, and other aircraft that emerged from the veil decades after their first flights. But those known projects are merely the outer shell. Inside the shell lies a Volta, narrative fortress where physical craft and disinformation coexist by design. Declassified CIA documents confirm that by April 1955, Groom Lake was already under agency control for the U-2 program, a reconnaissance aircraft invisible to public knowledge at the time. By the 1960s, it was operating under Project Oxcart. And by the 1980s, evidence suggests that the scope of the facility had shifted entirely. In 1989, a man named Bob Lazar publicly claimed he had worked at a facility known as S4, south of Groom Lake, on recovered non-human technology. He described a craft with gravity propulsion, element 115 fuel, and a reactor that distorted time-space. He was ridiculed, then followed, and quietly, several of his scientific claims began to align with declassified physics research years later. Satellite images were once forbidden. Even acknowledging the base's existence was illegal, yet leaked. Documents, blurry aerial shots, and insider testimony continued to pull Area 51 from the periphery of conspiracy into the reluctant light of legitimacy. In 2013, the CIA finally confirmed the base existed, but only in reference to historical aircraft testing. No mention of S4, no mention of propulsion systems, no mention of Lazar. But what they did not say was louder than what they did. Key timelines redacted, operations labeled only with internal codes like She's Dozy, Project Sigma, or Cypher C. Each blacked-out paragraph is a breadcrumb for the patient and the obsessed. Those who have spoken off record describe not one facility, but layers of containment levels, buried beneath security clearances that require biometric matching, quantum-coded keys, and off-site encryption to access. There are rumors of whole labs that exist off the grid power, supplied through subterranean conduits, with no connection to the civilian energy map. The technologies said to be stored or tested there defy classification. Light bending, metamaterials, inertial dampening systems, and even biological specimens subjected to vibrational resonance fields. Witnesses have described chambers with strange acoustics, rooms where sound falls flat and time feels subjective. And always, there is the silence. Pilots sign lifetime NDAs. Engineers vanish from their academic paths and never publish again. Security protocols are updated for foreign threats, but for leaks from within. Every fact that escapes is a risk model recalculated. In recent years, new signals have emerged. Leaked telemetry, intercepted transponders, high-frequency bursts on channels once used by HARP. In July 2024, a quiet FOIA release included a reference to an X-37B Delta platform. No flight records, no manufacturer listed. The operational theater, Grumalev Corridor. Some say it's just a testing ground. Others call it a vault for history that hasn't happened yet. So what is Area 51? A base, a black box, or a machine built to keep reality from leaking? Because the deeper you look, the less it looks like a place, and the more it feels like a boundary. And beyond it, something waits. It began with Roswell, an event dismissed, revised, and rewritten across generations. In July 1947, wreckage was recovered outside a remote ranch in New Mexico. The Army first announced a flying disc had been captured, then quickly retracted the statement. What followed was decades of speculation, conflicting testimonies, and a silence that grew more deafening with time. From that moment, public interest in government secrecy and unidentified aerial phenomena ignited. The spark became a flame with the rise of the Cold War and the expansion of America's classified aerospace programs. But the heart of the mystery, the nexus, was never Roswell. It was Nevada, Groom Lake, Dreamland. Area 51 became the symbol of that silence. It was where the unexplainable went to be explained in secret, where theories flourished and proof dissolved into shadows. Officially denied for decades, the base's existence was only acknowledged by the CIA in 2013. And even then, only as a test site for reconnaissance platforms. There was no mention of reverse engineering, no acknowledgement of Bob Lazar's testimony, and no explanation of the craft he described in the S4 subfacility. Still, every denial fed the belief. Every redaction became a question mark. A generation grew up watching static-filled VHS tapes, reading government PDFs with entire pages blacked out, and dissecting flight logs for inconsistencies. In time, the obsession with secrecy became a cultural phenomenon spanning books, documentaries, leaks, and late-night talk shows. Truth became a shape-shifting entity. By the time the internet matured, the mythos had matured with it. Online communities like Above Top Secret, Reddits, Are UFOs, and veteran-run blogs dissected Area 51 not just as a place, but as a symbol, a boundary between the known and the buried, between statecraft and starcraft. Then came September 2019, the viral wave known as Stormy Area 51. What started as a joke post, "They can't stop all of us," grew into a digital flashpoint. Over 2 million users RSVP'd to the event, and hundreds arrived outside the perimeter fence. Though the actual attempt was more carnival than siege, the message was unmistakable. The public was no longer satisfied with silence. Authorities responded with humor on the surface and heightened surveillance beneath it. Inside the fence, according to unconfirmed leaks, blackout conditions were triggered. Operations shifted underground. Sensor nets recalibrated. The joke had hit a nerve. In the wake of Storm Area 51, something changed. For the first time in decades, the US government began speaking publicly cautiously about unidentified aerial phenomena. The rebranding from UFO to UAP was deliberate, to strip the term of its cultural weight and recast the conversation in scientific terms. But the core question remained: what is being kept hidden? By 2020, the Pentagon confirmed that a UAP task force had been formed. Reports followed. Congressional hearings aired. Pilots described impossible maneuvers, unknown technologies, and objects without propulsion systems. And behind every official word, Area 51 loomed like a silent partner. Then, in July 2024, a new FOIA release arrived. Quietly uploaded to the National Archives with little media attention, it contained a single unclassified line that reignited speculation. X-37 B Delta operations initiated within Grumolev corridor. No further explanation was offered. No mission logs, no duration, no payload profile. But the name was familiar. The X-37B is an unmanned spaceplane long associated with secretive orbital tests. The Delta designation, however, had never been seen before. Researchers jumped in. Satellite imagery from June 2024 showed an unregistered heat bloom south of the traditional hangar cluster at Groom Lake. Amateur VLF radio listeners reported brief, irregular pulses along disused HAARP frequencies. Former defense contractors hinted at something far more advanced than a hypersonic glider. Was this the next phase in covert aerospace evolution, or something else entirely? The call went out again. Archive deep dives, off-record interviews, and decryption attempts on data fragments scraped from unsecured defense subnets. Each clue fed a narrative spiraling deeper, one that suggested Area 51 was not just a proving ground, but a containment zone. As the UAP narrative moves from conspiracy into congressional record, And as mainstream institutions begin to whisper what fringe researchers shouted for years, the boundary continues to thin. The investigation is no longer academic. It's personal, tactical, urgent, and the deeper one digs, the darker the desert becomes. Will you keep going?